Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to Politics Done Right. From the studios of KPFT 90.1 FM Houston, your community radio station, we have a great program for you today. You can get Politics Done Right Mondays through Fridays on Facebook Live at facebook.com/politicsdoneright, on YouTube Live at politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. Please do not forget to follow me on Twitter for updates. My handle is at Egberto Willies, at EGBERTOWILLIES. Before you get started, please remember to keep your community radio station in your minds, KPFT in your minds. Talk about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell them you know about this station in town, 90.1 FM Houston, that needs your support, that is there to provide that nourishment that we need. 713-526-5738. KPFT.org. Visit us online. Contribute online. KPFT 90.1 FM. You can visit us at kpft.org. We have a lot to talk about, folks. First of all, we are honored that Politics Done Right will be on twice a week going forward. On Thursdays, we keep our time at 12 noon Central Standard Time. And on Fridays, we are at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Why is that important? Because we're going to try to have the shows have two different flavors. The national international flavor will be on Thursdays, and we will continue to keep the national flavor on Friday, but we would like to have an insert of more local community events, etc. So if you are out there listening to us right now, recognize that Politics Done Right is your show. And in being your show, you send emails to info@politicsdoneright.com, info@politicsdoneright.com, with whatever community event, whatever community action you want to cover. Are you a journalist? Do you want to have a conversation for the rest of Houston to hear? Or are you from an organization who normally doesn't get played from our mainstream media? Or are you a newspaper, local newspaper, or whatever? We are here. Politics Done Right, KPFT 90.1 FM Houston. We are here to serve. So please remember, info@politicsdoneright.com. If you want to get to me to tell me you want to talk about X, Y, or Z, so that we can get you on air after we find out what you're wanting to talk about. Because again, this is your show. Community radio, we want to ensure that community is in fact within community radio. And yes, all the national and international news is something the entire community needs, but the community as well, we want to ensure we support what you need locally, nationally, internationally. Anyhow, we have a great program for you today. We have El Señor Arturo Dominguez. He is a local activist, a local journalist. He is now a member of Woke, the Writers and Editors of Color. He's going to talk about the 1619 Project relative to what many Afro Latinos think about this particular project. He kind of explains quite a few things about why some of the critiques are not well intentioned and probably not well designed as well. We're also going to have a piece that I did from my program yesterday on the internet, on all the different internet channels we're on, one of our good supporters had a race statement that I wanted to explore a bit further. So we do that. And of course, we have our standard clips that we bring in that occurs over the national news. What we'll do is we'll start with the clips. Then we'll bring in Arturo Dominguez. And after Arturo Dominguez, we'll go ahead and address one of my listeners who had a statement with regards to taking race into account. So, folks, we are going to have a good one for you. So sit tight. But before you sit too tight, I want you to listen to this empowering message by one of our most devout listeners and supporters, Tom Cernak. Listen to this and we'll take it on.
But I was thinking about that today too. I'm thinking it's too bad, our country is becoming so polarized and so disunited, like the disunited states or the divided states of America, which makes it kind of a terrible situation if you want to get anything done for the common good or for the community of people. And I was making notes today of just thinking about it's just too bad that we have this attitude in our country that, freedom is everything, or for a lot of people, it's like, don't bother me with your problems. Just solve your own problems, be on your own, be an individual, be a man or whatever, it's like.
It is sad. I just want to say that Leroy says, just want to say greetings. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm joining in to learn more. I will work on getting the microphone operational. Can hear very well. I'm glad that you're hearing well, Leroy, and thank you so kindly for being here. Man, you're in Alaska. Hey, I'm originally from Central America. That is like maybe 100 degrees in difference between where I'm from.
I'm kind of right in the middle of Michigan, so it's like
So all I can do is salute you for being able to handle that cold, my brother. I can only salute you. But I want to respond to what you had to say, Tom, because here's why I take the stance that I take. And why, not only that, but I respect guys like even Ledo, Mike Cisak, and all the right wingers and so forth. Not the politicians, the people.
Right.
And the reason why is if you ever sit down and just talk to people, right? Forget about their ideology and all of that. Don't talk for 1 second. Don't talk politics. Talk about the things that you want. Talk about the things that you would like to see happen in your community. It is so amazing that it would be pretty damn similar, Now, what generally happens then is people try to find a way to make the things that the little difference of one thing and the other that you'd want and play that up. It is like, let's look at the critical race theory, right?
Oh, yeah.
The critical race theory, I find it kind of interesting because we learn in school that the reason we teach history is so that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. That's what we teach, right?
Exactly.
And we don't teach history to say white people are bad or anything like that, because you know what's so funny? As somebody once said, there were black people in the South with slaves as well. I'm not trying to equate things at all. So black people don't knock me out for saying this. Right. But what I'm trying to say is that humanity has a common string, right? Humanity has a common thread. And that common thread is that we all have the predisposition to do good or do wrong. We all do. And it's not hue-based, it's not pigment-based, it's not race-based. It so happened to be that in these times, there is where power is concerned, we know where it's at. So if people start to learn that kind of stuff and also realize that things that I try to preach on my show, and Leroy, I hope you start coming to our show at politicsandright.com/TV every day, every weekday at 4 Eastern, 3 Central. What I like to point out is that racism is not a black against of a black thing only. It actually hurts white people. It hurts everybody, And if you can actually get people to understand that they are using my pigmentation to screw their own and the people of their own pigment. That is so stupid. Pigment. That doesn't mean anything, right? Pigment is stupid, right? But I mean, still, they're, in other words, they're using that division so that they can further pilfer people that look like them.
Yeah, you know what the problem is. I was thinking of this too. The hue man. You talk about hue man. So hue is part of who we are. We always judge by appearances, it's sad. Mm-hmm. But what really is the color problem today, I think, is green.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, green for money and also green for nature. So we've got the two greens involved here. Should we help nature? Or should we help? Should we just be concerned about ourselves and go for money? And I don't know if you got a chance to read it. It's a real interesting article. But David Brooks just came out with an article, kind of critiquing his own thinking of 10 years ago. He wrote this article called oh God, I don't know the exact title. It's about the Bobos. I don't know.
Is it his latest article or is it one of his latest?
It's in the Atlantic.
I'll look it up.
I posted a link there. But just Google David Brooks Bobo and Atlantic. And the articles, it's quite a long article, but it's really, I had to read it twice. But I think it's really interesting because he goes through this critique of what's going on in America. And he was actually self-critical. He says, yeah, I'm one of the Bobos. And Bobo stands for bourgeoisie bohemians. And he talks, and I thought really, yeah. And he gets into this thing about money. He says people that get into wealth and status, and they get into this culture. He calls it the creative culture, and and it looked like he said, "Oh, this is great." At first, he says they're gonna change America because they have progressive attitudes, and it turns out that really the first thing they do when they get into this status is they insulate themselves. Mm-hmm. They start thinking like the ultra wealthy, maybe even that they're not ultra wealthy, but they start insulating themselves from the rest of the world, and it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. They start thinking just like each other, and they want to exclude everybody else. And this has to do with buying into schools, Ivy League schools, and cheating on tests and making sure that your wealth status continues to grow so you can protect your kids and your legacy. And people just get so selfish at that level. And he was very upset about it. And he kind of diagnosed all the different segments of society. I didn't really quite understand all what he was talking about. I want to read it again, but
I got to check it out. That sounds interesting. He's got
a good point. And
I'm going to check it out because I have this love-hate relationship with David Brooks.
Yeah. Sometimes he comes out, he's so conservative.
Yeah, but there are some times that he writes some zingers that are really, really good. So I'm going to try. I'm going to look that one up and check it out.
Yeah, because he talks about wealth and income. It's mostly wealth inequality, mm-hmm. but it's even more subtle than that. It's beyond money. It's more of a cultural thing, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it. Because I see it around me, in Brighton. I mean, there's this. We have poor people here too, but they probably vote straight conservative Republican. Mm-hmm. Because they have this cultural mindset that this is the group I'm in, and I want to identify with the people here, and they don't see themselves as part of a bigger culture and part of a problem that needs to be resolved. So that's one of the things the Democrats have to work on, and trying to appeal to the poor people of rural America and the people that are left out in the working class. We have to broaden that whole movement so that everybody feels connected.
One hopes that Liz Cheney, that many Republican people, not the politicians, we know that they're long gone, as she's going to explain in a minute, but we really hope that the Republican constituents understand the clear and present danger that Donald Trump and his sycophants represent. Check this out, and then we'll take it on the other side.
We are also confronting a domestic threat that we've never faced before. A former president who's attempting to unravel the foundations of our constitutional republic, aided by political leaders who have made themselves willing hostages to this dangerous and irrational man.
We spend a lot of that is one of the most striking statements a Republican established politician can make. In effect, she's calling all the Trump sycophants, which is a vast majority of the politicians within the Republican Party, she's calling them out as willing hostages. In other words, they know what they're doing. They understand that it's deeper than the Stockholm Syndrome. When a Liz Cheney, someone that I don't really support, somebody whose ideology is diametrically opposed to that of progressives, but one woman whose using her strength, has come out better than any man in the Republican Party, better than any of the sycophant women in the Republican Party, any of those independent claimers in the country. She has come out and made the necessary statement that I hope enough Republicans in 2022, enough independents in 2022 understand the consequences of allowing these willing hostages to remain in power. This morning, as I drank some coffee with my daughter, an ad sort of went by, and I thought I heard what I thought I heard, and I had to get the remote from her and rewind it, and then grabbed my cell phone to tape it, because it is the kind of ad that is so effective, and we can't allow it to go unnoticed, because it could have an impact on legislation, specifically as they continue to build back better, because of the influence of the older people, and if they decide that they are going to believe the lie. So anyhow, let's go ahead and play it, and then we'll take it on the other side.
I take medication for systemic lupus and cancer. Recently, I've been hearing about Medicare negotiation and how some in Congress think it's a good idea. It isn't. In countries where the government sets prices and controls access, patients experience dangerous wait times. Some never gain access to the life-saving medicines we have here in America. Government price setting will hurt seniors like me. Let's never let that happen here.
Let me tell you, I cannot express how completely and entirely pissed as a political activist that I was seeing that ad, and that not only political activists, but any thinking person should feel about it. I want to, immediately thereafter making the tape, I went ahead and did the blog. And I want to read a portion of the blog, because you heard what she had to say. She made the claim that somehow other countries that do this, their people are in dire straits. Well, look, here's the reality. And let me tell you what I wrote. I wrote as follows. This morning, well, let's start with the thing. Ironically, the woman in the ad has the same disease that my wife has, systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE. There have not been any significant strides on this disease, likely because it does not affect enough people. And that is the problem with having a system that is dependent on for-profit drugs. Let's discuss several drugs specific to the mentioned disease, SLE, in the ad. It has been managed successfully for decades with old medications no longer under patent, like prednisone, less than $20 a month, hydrochloroquine, less than $10 a month. And if one has kidney involvement, it's called mycopholate mofetil. I am not good at pronouncing these names, but you get the point. You can get that particular drug for under $60 a month. My wife participated in that study, the Benlysta study by Big Pharma, GSK, Big Pharma called GlaxoSmithKline. They are the ones who developed Benlysta. Supposedly, if you have nephritis or some lupus-caused disease, this drug is supposed to help you, right? My wife participated in the study for several years to test the drug Benlysta by Big Pharma, GSK. But, there was no perceived measurable positive effects of that drug on her at all. Now that the test is over, it would cost her. I want you guys to listen. Remember, I told you her other drugs was sum total less than $100 a month. They're all they're no longer on patent, right? So it's in the public domain. And by the way, most drugs are developed by us anyway. But anyway, Benlysta, the drug she tested, if she wants to partake in taking that drug for her health, suppose it really mattered, it would cost her $42,000 per year. Again, I repeat, that's not a mistake. $42,000 a year if she wanted to use that drug. Again, one should remember all drugs were in some manner funded by taxpayers directly or indirectly. Yet those drug pushing terrorists continue to rip off Americans. Look, the statements in the ads are false and misleading. They claim that other countries that have price controls on drugs have significant wait times. Have you tried to get an appointment recently with a specialist? That's a huge wait time, isn't it? Have you tried to get a drug that you can't afford? They've turned you into a beggar if you want a drug that you can't afford because they're ripping you off. $42,000 for one drug for 1 year, Benlysta. Think about who can afford that. That is more money than most Americans make every year for one drug. And if you take Benlysta, you probably need more. They fatten the coffers of executives and shareholders that played no part in developing these drugs. The ad would have one believe that humane procedures in other countries to save the lives of most without causing their bankruptcy is somehow dangerous. The fact says otherwise. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as OECD, is an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. Their goal is to shape policies that foster prosperity, equality, opportunity, and the well-being for all. They rank countries in many areas, including healthcare. As drug companies and other health companies continue the pilfering of Americans, we continue to remain mediocre in life expectancy. Where do you think we land in all these industrialized countries and countries all over the world? We pay more than twice as much in healthcare than anybody else. And by the way, how is our life expectancy? Is it better than everybody else? Should it be better? We're pumping a lot of money into it. We are ranked 26th in the country. Every country that reigns in our big pharma and other personal wealth pilfering companies do much better than we do. Everyone that reined them in, every country that reined these savages in, they do better with life expectancy than we do. What kind of fools are we? Do not be fooled by these ads. They want you to support policies that go against your interests. They want you to pay as much as they can get out of you. Remember, I wrote a piece and I did a video a few months back that says what they charge you is whatever the market will bear, and the total amount of your savings and everything that you could come up with. Do not be fooled. These guys are financial and healthcare terrorists. That's what they are. And until we call them out for what they really are, until we put this, not because you're wearing a suit and a tie and you command 6 or 7 figures mean you're worth it, or you are a good person, or you are deserving of it. They like to tell you, if the government control prices, if the government start telling us we can't charge this, what will it do for innovation? The people who profit from healthcare, the people who profit from making these drugs, are not the people who innovated to create them, are not the geniuses that created it. And it's not the engineer, the physicists, the doctors. These are not the people making the trillions in profits from these things. So don't believe the lie that if somehow we stop these guys from making big profits, that somehow it's going to affect innovation. It's going to create less drugs. That is crap. It is scientifically crap. Why? It's not the scientists that make all the money. It's the shareholders that make all the money, and the executives getting the bonuses. And you know what? They don't have a lot upstairs. They're not the ones that know to create the chemicals. They're not the ones that know how the body operates. They're not the ones that do these things. So do not buy the lie that somehow forcing these guys to do things right would somehow affect innovation, because if there's no profit, nobody's going to innovate. You don't have to ask people who know, engineers, doctors, physicians, physicists. We are naturally very curious. We are inquisitive. And that's why we innovate. We rarely innovate because there's a buck on the other side. What you have to understand is the corrosive nature of the capitalist does not apply to those who are subjected or subjective to the capitalists. Let's remember these realities. It is time for us to learn these things and no longer fall for the misinformation and the crap from the capitalist structure, from those who are leading unjustifiably. Folks, those commercials, those ads are effective. It is important that we share the truth, to prevent them from having their intended effect. Pete Buttigieg, I mean, everybody's been talking about the supply chain issue, the supply chain problem that's happening, and what is Biden going to do about the supply chain problem? And I'm going to hit this one time again, and that is a private sector problem. I want you to listen to Buttigieg. He's not going to quite say it that way. No administration is going to say, we don't have control. It's a private sector who runs this stuff. We're going to, but they're coming to beg us. The private sector is coming to beg the government, give us a hand, because we just can't do it by ourselves. Something that when they're making money, they like to tell you, leave us alone. But I want you to listen to Buttigieg, and then we'll take it on the other side, because this is important for Americans to understand. This supply problem is a profit-based problem. They screwed the Americans to keep their profits high and give them more, make them at best uncomfortable. Check this out. We'll take it on the other side.
I want to move on because you mentioned infrastructure. I want to talk about the supply chain crisis. 2 weeks after the Biden administration announced that key ports would move to 24/7 operations, supply chain backlogs are still really not getting much better. There are persistent truck driver shortages, warehouses are overflowing, an estimated $24 billion worth of goods are stuck waiting to go through U.S. ports. So how are these going to be fixed? And do you expect these persistent delays to continue through the holidays?
Well, we are going to continue to see challenges. The steps that we're taking are making a difference. But think about all of the things that have to happen to get a product to a shelf on time. Fundamentally, it's up to the producers, the shippers, and the retailers. And we're doing everything we can to help them move those goods across infrastructure that's often outdated. Look, we've got demand that's off the charts. The Retail Federation is predicting an all-time record high in terms of sales. We've got supply, which is in some cases actually up, but not up enough to keep up with that demand. And then the biggest thing of all, of course, you have the pandemic. The pandemic is poking holes in supply, no matter how good any company or any administration is. We're going to keep working on things like the port issues, smoothing out anything else that is within our control. But the only way we can really put these disruptions behind us is to put the pandemic in the rearview mirror, which is why the president has been leading decisively to do just that.
If you notice, he said, we'll do what we can. And remember that it's the producers, the manufacturers, and the suppliers whose job it is to get this done. I want folks to be clear here. The reason we are having a supply problem has everything to do with the private sector. They are the reasons why they have just-in-time inventory. They are the reasons why they didn't invest in infrastructure. They are the reason that they've paid off the government to have lousy ports, lousy infrastructure. It is they who created the atmosphere of failure that we currently see. It is the private sector who is responsible for these failures. Anyone who continues to say, let's just leave it up to the private sector, you're saying, let's just leave the pain of the people up to those who best profit from them. Don't you ever forget that. We want to change that. We have to have better government controlled by we the people who create the regulations that are necessary to prevent those folks who with profits on our backs from being able to screw us year after year, decade after decade. We are honored to have Arturo Dominguez. He's a prolific writer, and he is the founder and editor at The Antagonist magazine, among many others. Recently, Arturo was elevated to a leadership position at WEOC, Woke, Writers and Editors of Color. He is with us today to discuss many subjects, including his recent 1619 Project article. Arturo, I think this is the second or third, or maybe four times you've been here with Politics Done Right. It's a pleasure, as usual, to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Oh, man, happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Well, look, man, I tell you, you are the one who actually introduced me to Woke, a group that I found quite interesting, a group that I found relaxing, and I mean, it just brought one's spirit up. Why don't you, before we get into the subject at hand, tell us how you got involved with this particular group?
Well, with Woke, it was founded by two Black women, Teresa Price and Allison Gaines, and it was more of a medium-centered type of project or community. I'm one of the first few that were invited in early on, and I was at the time I was in search of some kind of community. I've been a member of writer groups that were predominantly white, and it's hard to, when you're doing anti-racism work and touching on things that others don't normally touch on, they're uncomfortable. So being in a group that was very Anglo-centric made it difficult. There's a lot of pushback. I mean, instantly get kicked out for no reason, things like that. So when I came across this, and it was very early on, one of the editors at Medium, Adrienne Gibbs, who's a member of the group, she quickly supported it, and then Quintessa got involved, and LA Justice got involved with managing our case for the 1619 Project. And before long, I found myself in a community that was welcoming to someone they consider of color, but is white passing. And it was interesting because I found myself in the group that was being run by Black women, and every one of them embraced me as their own. And I treat everything, especially in Black spaces, treat it as being a guest. By having that mentality, I feel like you're not necessarily walking on eggshells, but you're more cautious about what you say. I think if white people took that same approach and came from a place of more asking questions as opposed to pushing, beliefs or whatever on people, then we could probably move further. So I found that in this community. I found a willingness from a lot of writers that were anti-racism writers that were willing to put the stuff out there to try to make a difference, not just talk about it, but potentially offer solutions to problems. And I found that a big selling point for me.
Well, I can tell you, just based on the adoration that folks have for you in that group, you are not a guest man. You are the group, and in fact, you were one of the first that they asked to, as they did some restructuring, to ask to become a part of the leadership of that group. So, congratulations about that.
Thank you.
One of the ways that I really got involved with you is when you addressed the Black Latino issue. In other words, and you took a whole lot of flack from maybe passing Latinos as you just passing white Latinos as you kind of made, and you took a lot of flack for it. This is not the subject of today's discussion, but why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because what I always say about you is you've got some pelotas, dude.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I attribute my pelotas to my upbringing, man, in Jersey. In the 70s and 80s, it wasn't pretty. It was tough, and so yeah, I took that approach. When it comes to the backlash, I'm a pushback kind of guy. Everybody wants to take the approach of just stop, don't interact with anybody, stop, just let it go, let it die down. But the problem is the more you ignore it, the bigger the fire gets, and it doesn't die down. And I'm not gonna sit here and denounce cancel culture and all that stuff. It is what it is. Call it what you want. But to me, I call it consequence culture. But you say racist things, you're gonna pay for it. Right. So. But the backlash I got, I still get it. I still get backlash.
Because that article went viral.
Right, and I mean, if you look at the Latino Rebels page right now, and you open an article, or you scroll to the bottom of the main page, mine is still top 5 trending, and that's been a year and a couple months now.
Right.
So people are still reading it. People are still clicking from there to the tweets that are highlighted in the article, which are my tweets. And, I still catch some heat here and there. I got one guy who he read like the first paragraph and then wrote a rebuttal calling me racist and all this stuff. And he's never read my work. He admitted he didn't read the article, but man, every Friday, like clockwork, he's trolling me. And I laugh and I troll him right back. I don't play around. I don't block people. I don't, people threaten me because of that article. I had people trying to dox me, and I could tell that's what they were doing. And I told them, look, dude, dox me, don't dox me. You want me to give you my address? I'd give you my address, but
it's not like they can't find it. I've been doxed so many times, it ain't funny,
Right. And, and when I tell people that threaten me, I tell them, come on, come to my house, because, you might think I'm some fragile liberal or whatever, but I probably have more guns than you. So, you know what I mean? And that's what I tell people. I'm like, go ahead, dude. I dare you. I'm waiting for you to come to my door. Okay. So just come.
These guys are generally just mouthpieces. You and I know. So every now and then you have the crazy that really goes through with these things.
Yeah.
And I think that you just have to be always watchful and whether you're a writer or not, you always have to be watchful. Now, tell me a little bit about at Woke, you are a part of the 1619 project submission of articles, and you submitted a recent article with respect to Latinos in 1619. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, well, our 1619 project, just to clarify, is not the same as the Nicole Hannah-Jones and the New York Times 1619 project. Our project is focused on making the case for the 1619 project. So one of the main categories that we have it broken down into 5 different categories. I can't name them off the top of my head, but for the sake of this one, my piece was focused on addressing criticisms. And most of the stuff that I read went after a lot of the white academics who basically teamed up, and wrote a scathing op-ed to the New York Times, claiming all these errors, this, that, and the other, not differentiating the fact that the 1619 project from the New York Times is more of a journalistic piece than it is a historical piece, right? And the idea of the 1619 project is to frame the narrative of what built the U.S., right? Beginning with that day, that 1619, yeah. Port Comfort, right? Like we all know that day. And a lot of the arguments from the Latino community came from a lot of Afro Latinos that were, their argument was that Black history in the United States started prior to 1619. And while that's true to a degree, none of those the Spaniards landing in
Panama.
St. Augustine in the 1500s, right? Way before 1619. That didn't affect how the United States was built. It didn't. It happened. Nobody's denying it happened. But the 1619 project's focus is, from that day in Port Comfort, is how today's American capitalist society lives. And we all know that the capitalism in the United States can only thrive on exploited labor. Mm-hmm. And without the slave labor force, you have, what I've heard people refer to as wage slaves, which is basically, you've got all these Latinos working the fields, harvesting food, feeding the nation, and they're not only being paid dirt, but they're being treated like dirt. They live in, squalid conditions, things like that. So the 1619 Project acknowledges those little things. So my piece was focused on clapping back on those that they really went after Nicole Hannah-Jones and the 1619 Project. And I thought it was unfair. And I also thought it was in bad faith. I thought the arguments were disingenuous because they failed to read just the main entry point to the 1619 Project, which essentially discusses that it's a living document. It may have some errors and there may be a few things missing here and there, but for the sake of focusing on on U.S. history and what it's become today, that's what they're missing. You see, they're
Let me ask you something, because I think you in stating that in one of the statements that you just made, I think you may have co-opted to saying there were in fact some errors in the 1619 Project as written by Hannah-Jones. Is that really the case, or is just the who tells the history that really makes these errors?
I honestly think it's a little of both. There were a couple of errors, and it was really just, like, for context, they needed to add a word here or something like that,
So, and these were corrected at the New York Times, right?
Right. These were corrected and addressed, per journalistic integrity, mm-hmm. that the edits were made, that was brought to their attention. But when you read, if you just focus on the one scathing op-ed that was published at the New York Times, and they addressed it directly, which I commend them for. They even gave those guys space to talk their trash. But if you read that, I think that's more focused on, I feel like it's more focused on who's telling the history.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to get at, because right. I think too often, even the parts of history that one interprets, it is subject to interpretation. Did the Americans commit genocide in America or not? Yes, they would say, well, they attacked us, and we'll say, well, you took their land. That's it. So it's a matter of who tells the story. Anyhow, so now, do you think that the Latinos, the Afro Latinos that came against Hannah-Jones on these articles, were pretty much used, wanted, because we always have that problem, right? You get a Candace Owen or this new guy that wrote a book about wokeness or whatever it is he wrote about. I can't remember his name right now. Are these guys just being used for their hue, for their color, as a weapon, as a person that they can say, look, even this guy thinks you're wrong?
I know a lot of people pointed to that. I can't say that the motivations of some of the Afro Latinos and some, from the academic community and stuff too. I can't say that their motivations were anything like that, but I do know that you saw a lot of people point to these individuals and say, look, here's, somebody else that disagrees with it too, and they're Black, and again, they're failing to realize the difference between, being an Afro Latino and being Black in America. There's a big cultural divide there, like in my article, I mentioned how certain religions from, Central and Western Africa still live and still thrive in Latin America, all over the place, from Cuba to Colombia. Well, in the U.S., aside from like areas in Louisiana, that identity's not there.
There's no history of that. Santeria and all these other things,
It's all wiped out. So, so the Black community, that's why they're Black, and they're not, Congolese or what have you. It's because all of that stuff was erased.
Right.
So, for Afro Latinos, like in Cuba, there's, direct connections to parts of Western Africa and things, and they celebrate that. And, people don't realize it, but, Cuba's a majority, Black and
Cuba, Brazil, and several other Latin American countries. Yeah. Caribbean countries. Yeah.
Right. They're predominantly Black. And they understand where, they came from. They understand that how their religions eventually mixed with Catholicism. That's how you got Santeria. And I mean, again, Santeria was born of, Western African spiritualism and, blended with a little bit of Catholicism because, that's what the slaves had to do to make it acceptable to the priests. They had to inject a piece of Catholicism so that, the priests are like, cool, you're worshiping Jesus, fine.
Right.
And that's how those religions were born. You don't have that here in the U.S. And, that's why I feel like, I don't know, Allison one day mentioned me being pro-Black, and I've never considered myself.
Explain who Allison is first of all for the audience.
Allison is one of the founders of Writers and Editors of Color, Allison Gaines. And we were in a chat one day, I don't remember what we were discussing, but she mentioned that I was, pro-Black Latino writer. And I never saw myself that way, but once she mentioned it, it kind of opened up like another door where I was looking at my work from that light. And I thought, I guess I am a pro-Black Latino writer. Because, at the end of the day, when I ended my 1619 Project article, and I have it pulled up, but I said at the very end, I said, because without Black people, the American dream wouldn't exist. In a sense, everyone owes them for that, even the immigrants and Afro Latinos.
Even the Afro Latinos, exactly.
Right. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I get from that aspect, being that we owe them first, and we owe the indigenous people first before anybody else. And if you look at it from that perspective, then you can begin to understand, why we need to uplift them first.
Well, you call it, maybe Allison calls it pro-Black. I find you to be a writer, an author that actually just goes out there and tells things the way they need to be told. Because again, too often, and you upset folk in just about every single group. So it's like you're an equal opportunity offender. Latinos, Blacks, whites, everybody. And that is the art of that shows an art form from a writer who really means what they're talking about and one should take seriously. Well, last question here as we come close to the end. Congratulations again for your ascendance at woke. And I won't call you pro-Black. I'll just call you pro-humane. And secondly, last question is always, what would you have liked me to ask you? You've been with me before, so that question is coming. What would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't?
And I don't know why I'm never prepared for this one. Because, I wanted to discuss, the Writers and Editors of Color group. We did that.
Go ahead,
the article.
please.
But yeah, it's an interesting, I like it because, in the Writers and Editors of Color group, we do a lot of things, a lot of projects. Like we do the Black History 365 project, which, we write about little known Black history, throughout the year. It doesn't have to just be, Black History Month. The case for the 1619 project has been pretty exciting. We've gotten the attention of Nicole Hannah-Jones. She retweeted my article, and I have to give her credit because I think it was because of her that it blew up, because there was a lot of talk in the Black community and on Black Twitter and in Black spaces about my article, and most of it was positive. And a lot of people were surprised that any Latinos even spoke out against the 1619 project, because, a lot of things in the Latino community stay in the Latino community. It's weird like that. But so yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the project. I enjoy the community and growing the community. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, if I could think of what you didn't ask me about, because we did do the White Latinos thing, but I guess maybe about police accountability, because I do a lot of that. Cops hate me too, but I also have a lot more cop friends than I ever had before. So a lot of the things I write about apparently resonate with cops. So there's that, and it's all about basically anything racial justice and the intersection of politics and race. That's where I live.
Well, let me tell you, Arturo, you will be back. There's so much more that you have to talk to us about. It was my pleasure having you, Arturo Dominguez, the editor and founder of The Antagonist magazine, and recently elevated to leadership of the writers and editor of color. Thank you so kindly for having been with Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having me, Alberto.
I love interacting with my audience. I love interacting with you wonderful people. Let me tell you something, first of all, where I come from. I believe everybody, most Americans, most people in the world are good people. I think there are influences, externalities that are the things that really creates all the isms. My isms were created by how I was reared. How I was reared was created by how my parents were reared, etc., 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 and it goes on. Change is only made when it's intentional, when one decides that in order to have a better society, we actually make those changes within that then gets reflected without. I had a interesting conversation on my internet show, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and all these other places where it goes live. And there's one particular person who I don't think this person is a nice person. He's actually a supporter of the show. And he said, Egberto, if you look at everything through racial lens, then that's all you're going to see. Interestingly, I don't personally believe in race, but let me play this piece that I cut that I did from the show yesterday, because I think it's informative, and I think it is something that we need to get out there. And let me tell you how I know it's informative. My daughter listened as I was making the cut, and she said, Dad, I like that part. A millennial told me she liked that part because it makes a difference. Check this out. We'll take it on the other side. When you view everything through a racial lens, all you see is race. Lee Grant, I promise you, people of color do not want to look at things through racial lens. Unfortunately, they are generally forced to do so. I am a guy that doesn't believe in race at all. But when I walk into the store, I see the eyes, I get the following. When I walk into certain churches, I see what occurs. So instead of saying that we need to stop looking at everything through racial lens, I'm going to ask you, Lee, you're a good guy. You're also a good supporter, brother Lee Grant. But I'm going to ask you to do something honestly. Lee Grant, because you're the one who made the statement, if you look at everything through race, then it is pervasive. I'm going to ask you the next time you are in an area that you are normally very comfortable in a white space and you see somebody different, whether Asian, black, or whatever, be honest with yourself. You don't have to tell me. Just be honest with yourself and tell me if you have a slight reaction beforehand. Because what people of color always see when they walk into white spaces is not necessarily racism, but an apprehension to who they are. And when we can honestly accept that to the point that we make, and I'm going to use myself as an example. I don't want to play like I'm some goody two shoe or anything like that, because I'm not. And I always use my transformation from being a homophobe into one of the biggest gay rights supporters with a whole lot of gay friends. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There was a time in my life when if I saw two men kissing, holding hands, two women doing this, it actually had a material, even as I held back, it had a physical response on me. And that because of how the brain works and how I was cultured at home in Panama. I always tell people I have the 3 strikes: Black, Latino, and Caribbean. Very homophobic cultures. And I overcame that to the point now that it's not only mental, but it's also carnal. And it's important for us to get there. So what I tell a lot of my white brothers and sisters is something that is quite easy to understand. And that is, instead of telling people, when you hear black folk talk about, we're always talking about race, why don't you forget about it and somehow it's going to go away? Try to understand the space in which they live in and what they feel every time they go into the space and why they feel what they feel when they go into that space. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join. I hope you like that. It's an important concept. And what I asked Lee Grant to do, I want to make it an exercise for everybody. So please consider doing it, whoever you are. You can get Politics Done Right Mondays through Fridays on Facebook Live at facebook.com/politicsdoneright. On YouTube Live at politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. Please do not forget to follow me on Twitter for updates. My handle is at Egberto Willies, at EGBERTO Willies. Please remember to keep your community radio station, KPFT, in your minds. Talk about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell them you know about this station in town, 90.1 FM Houston, that needs your support, that is there to provide that nourishment that we need. KPFT.org. Visit us online. Contribute online. KPFT 90.1 FM. You can visit us at KPFT.org. Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people.